Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are going to paint a ladybug, and I picked this because I love the variety of edges that we have in it. So you'll see there's some blurry edges at the back. At the front there's some really well-defined edges. Within the ladybug itself, she has some soft edges, and then there's some really hard edges down here. So we're going to paint with all those different edges. We're also going to try this lighting effect where you use your brush to wipe out the paint, so we'll be able to practice that. We can do this painting, if you like, with just 3 colors, which would be a yellow, red, and blue. I think the best blue would be ultramarine, and mix them all, or you can use different colors from your palette. And I'm going to try doing it with just the 3 colors because it's a good exercise on mixing as well. So let's before we wet our paints now, just so we wake them up and they have a chance to soften before we're ready to go. For brushes, I've got a Fumu 8 mop, which I think will be great for doing the background. You could also use this type of brush, a hack brush, because we've got a lot of paper to cover. I'm going to use this brush today as a mixing brush because I need a bigger puddle, and I want to make sure that I get a nice big puddle. And then I have a Escoda Perla, 2 different sizes. I guess one is probably an 8 and one is probably a 12. Hard to say anymore, but that's what we're going to be using today. Spray bottle paints, 2 glasses of clean water to start, and off we go. So I have drawn it onto the paper, and I pushed it in a little bit because you'll see in the original there was no room for him on this side, so it's a bit squished up from the original picture. And I'm going to take a kneaded eraser and just make sure my pencil is not on there too hard. So this kneaded eraser is from Faber-Castell, and pretty much it's just squishy, and I like to roll it and then roll it on my paper, and it just takes off the excess pencil marks so they're not too harsh, and we can still see them through our initial wash. So I'm just going to do that. Okay, and we're ready to go. Okay, so as far as approach, I think the best approach for us is, I got a bit of a dirty iPad, is to do the background first. This is all going to be fuzzy, and then we'll do some darker paint here. Maybe we'll start with this strip here because there is definitely a border, and if we just wet that part, we'll be able to create this harsh line here, this hard line, and then we can move on to the background, and we'll try the effect of making these light circles, whatever they're called. And maybe what we can do is we can mix our colors, and then we'll just practice those circles and see how that works out. So I'm just going to get a piece of practice paper so that I'm ready to try that. This we'll have to do. Okay, so mixing up our petals. Move these brushes to the side. I'm going to need a yellow. Now my yellow is just a mix of Hansa. I think there's some Indian yellow here. I just threw a bunch of yellows into the palette, and that's what I ended up with. So I'm going to make sure I have a big puddle of this yellow because it's going to form my green. And maybe a little bit more over here. Okay. We really need some pretty big puddle. Let's use this spray bottle. It's better. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's the yellow, and then I might just use a bit of gamboge as well and make a separate puddle for that, because each of these will create our green. Okay, and then we decided ultramarine was the color we wanted to use. So I'm going to make another big puddle of ultramarine. Need a lot of this. Okay. And for our first wash, it's going to be kind of light. I guess what we'll do, a wash, we'll stick to the original plan. We'll do maybe we'll do the light wash at the top first, but let's just do our little testing of the way to wipe out. So I'm just going to use a palette green. This is, I think, Hooker's green. And I'm going to put that down. And while it's still wet, you wait for a few minutes for it to dry. And then you take a brush that is part synthetic so that you can actually grab the water out of it. So I've got a clean brush, making sure it's nice and clean. I'm actually going to dry it off a bit on my cloth. And then I just go like this and create a circle. And that's how we're going to put those background circles in. You can make sure there's not much water on the brush. It's clean. And then I've wiped it off on my cloth as well. So if I do it in a really wet area, it takes up less paint. Okay, but if I do it in a drier area, it's starting to dry over here, then actually in the wet area, it takes up more paint as it dries. So I think the trick is, once you're done, is to just wipe up whatever that excess is there. And you don't really want a blossom here. You want the brush that you're using to be fairly dry. So that's the effect we'll use. And then you can also add a little bit of yellow hue into it. Do the same thing, wipe your brush off and let that blend in. And that's the effect that will make. In the picture, some of them are actually just partially done. So they're darker on one side than they are the other. So you could also try that. So this one is darker over here. And that's the effect. If you spray it, it will soften up some of those edges as well, because sometimes it doesn't look as soft as you might like it to. So that's how that is done. Before we start, I thought I would mask a bit of this. Unfortunately, my mask, is in terrible shape. So I don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to give it a shot. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have a synthetic brush, very small. So I'm going to put some soap on that, and then I'm trying to get just the part of the mask where it isn't ruined. So what we're going to try to do is mask the areas that we want to protect, number one. And the second thing is we want to do a complete wash. So we are going to make sure that we have nice edges where we mask. We will probably have a chance to fix them later on, but I just want to make sure all of the whites have been identified. And these are all where the hard lines would be. So whatever area, I guess there's two parts to this. There's a couple of dots here and there too in this area. So we'll add that. Oops, I did get a gooky part of my mask. I'm trying to get just the liquid part. Okay, Kleenex or something. Try that again. Okay, liquid part. Okay, and If you want, there's a couple of highlights on his legs. You could do that as well. Not many. And there's this one line that goes down here. Okay, and that is probably about it. You could spatter some mask if you want on the edge of the leaf. So the way I would do that is I would just highlight the edge of the leaf, cover it with some scrap paper, like so, like this. Okay, like so. And then what we're going to do here, let's see if we can just spatter some. The other way you could do that is with a toothbrush. Oops. Okay. Might be a little trickier than I thought, but let's give it a shot. Yeah, toothbrush might work better because it's going to be finer. So let me just see if I have one handy. Okay. So again, we're just going to try to get it at the end of the toothbrush. And yeah, that's going to be much better. And then we're just going to erase or rub off the parts that we don't need for that. Okay, and then another little trick with masking is there's some areas on here that would be nice to mask, but they have very soft edges. So what we can do there is we can wet the areas with a brush. I guess we can use any old brush we have here. So wet the area. So let's say we want this part here to be softer. Okay, it kind of goes there, here, and then into here, there's a little bit, like so. So make sure you don't have too much water. I put too much water on that spot. So a little dabbing off our puddle, so it's just damp. And now we're going to go back in with our mask and just wet it in those spots, or just like so. Here, it probably will work better here because there's a bit more water. That other spot was a little bit too dry. But what we could do is just take our spray bottle and very gently wet that. Okay. Okay. And that should create a nice edge on those spots. Okay. And that's it. Wait for that to dry, and then we'll proceed to the next step. You'll notice that I never masked this area here, and that's because this is going to have a soft edge. You can use, and you can see the green actually almost runs right into it. So we're not worried about the shape of the shell. That will, we should be in good shape without masking that. All right, so my masking is good and dry. What I'm going to do now is just take off the excess here that I had along this area that I wanted to highlight. Okay, so any of those big dots I'm removing, and then I'm trying to create some randomness on this side. So I remove some of it, and some of it I do not. Okay, so that's that. That looked like it worked fairly good. So our first wash is going to be the green, and I think we'll do it in stages. We will start at the dark and finish that, do some of these highlights in it, and then we'll do all of this at once. And I've decided that I should probably use a pretty hefty brush for this with a good point. So I have a Femu brush, I have an Escoda Perla 18, and I have an Escoda Ultima 16. Now the thing with these brushes is they hold a lot of paint. So when you're mixing the paint on your palette, you're going to have to mix up a fair amount of paint. So I'm completely soaking my palette so that I can get as much paint as possible. I'm going to start with my yellow. And this is just a Hansa yellow with a dirty brush here. So Hansa yellow and a few other yellows that I have in here. Okay, and I want a big puddle of that. It's a bit yellowy green, but I'm okay with that. It's can be yellowy green, as you can see in the picture. It's not. Oh, and you can't see that. Oh, there we go. I could probably move this over a little bit. Okay. And then you can see a bit more of what I'm doing. Okay, so there's my yellow puddle. It's a pretty good puddle. And then I'm going to mix some ultramarine. Oops, wrong one. So again, I'm really just digging my brush right in there to get that color. Okay, and so it's a very rich puddle in there, very thick. And I will probably add a little bit of neutral tint here, over here, in case I need to darken some of this, which I might. Okay. So when it starts bubbling up like this, you can tell that, well, one, you've moved your brush pretty fast, but two, that you're mixing a thick enough mixture. More ultramarine. Okay, so what is helpful at this stage is to wet your paper with a fine mist. Let's see. I sometimes use this. It's a hairdresser mister. And actually, I'm going to also wet the back a little bit so it sticks more to the palette, or to the glass here. And just apply a full helping of that. Now I want to mix my green, and I'm going to do that in the middle here between my blue and my yellow. And as we said before, the bottom is a lot darker than the top. So the green's going to be quite rich in that area, and actually it's darker above here too. Okay, so, no, actually I might try this brush. I might just use this brush because it's got good coverage. Okay, and what I want to do here is I want to get it right up to that line I made with the mask. Okay, and then I'm going to look at the color. I wouldn't mind some variation in the color, so I'm going to add a little bit of yellow over here. A little bit of neutral tint down here. So everything's nice and wet, and it gives me the flexibility to do that. Maybe some, okay. Now I'm just looking at this line and making sure it's nice and perfect as I go across. Got a hair here. Okay. And it's still nice and wet, so I can continue working it if I want it bluer or darker. But I think that's probably a good mixture. Oops. Nice straight line there. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe off this excess here so it doesn't run back. Okay, I'm going to do the same color scheme up in this corner. And I give it one more spritz just at the top. Make sure it's nice and wet. So it's very dark up here. I got my green mixture, make it a little greener there. And then I'm going to take a smaller brush, or a more pointed brush, probably better. And I'm just going to go around, oops, too much water on there. Okay, I'm just going to go around here. Okay. And this ends about halfway down. So I'm getting as close as I can, and then I'm taking a brush that's not soaking wet, so I'm dabbing it off. And I'm going to go closer. Okay. And then here I need it to be kind of mirroring the shape of this leaf as it goes through. So if I drew a line, it should match that over there. Okay, so now it starts to be a bit more yellow. So I'm putting some more yellow in. Trying to keep it very wet as I go. A bit more yellow. I got a hair there. I think I got it. No, I didn't. Sometimes it's easier to just drag them to the edge of the paper. Okay. Good enough. Okay, now I think the color is not saturated enough, so I'm adding more yellow. Adding more yellow again, starting from this side. Okay. And it gets quite pale as we get closer in there. And I darken up this part before it dries. Kind of trying to make more of a gradated wash here. Okay. All right. Now, I want to go in with more yellow, but I don't want a soaking wet brush. So I'm squeezing it off again, going into my yellow. It's a bit too wet, but it's going to have to do. Okay, dipping my brush in the yellow, squeezing it off before I leave the water. And this part here is kind of faded out a bit. It's got a bit of blue in it, and it's got a bit of yellow, but it's not really a well saturated color. So I'm just trying to mirror that. Okay, and then again, we want to go around. Okay. I might just give it a mist again so that it's smoother. It seems like it's not as smooth as I would like. Okay, and then working my way down here. And I'm going to join this paint here. Okay, I'm not so worried about this. This is going to be brown. So anything that's going to be brown, I'm not so concerned about blending the color. I need to adjust the color a little bit. Make it a bit greener again. Okay. I'm making sure I get the coverage here. And now I need to go back to my smaller brush and just work around these little parts. If my smaller brush is way wetter than the paint that's on there, then it starts to create kind of a not a good transition. So just be careful with the amount of water that you have on here as you do this part. So see what's happening here? It's too wet, and it's not blending with what I already put on. But fortunately, because my paint that I just put on is so wet, I'm still in fairly good shape. Okay, working my way around here. Okay, and join this one. So just be careful that you're not overlapping it too much. Okay, now we let that dry. Don't fuss with it. Don't go back in. What you got there is what you're going to have. And if you want to make sure it blends nicely, just give the whole thing a spritz. And you should get some nice effects there. I like what's happening here. And this part here is supposed to be a soft edge, so we might just come down a little bit. Probably already dried, but I think we're going to be okay. Okay, now there is a shadow under him, but we're too wet to go in now, so we'll add the shadow after the fact. Now the other effect that we can try is highlighting these spots. I forget what you call them, but the light is catching and creating kind of a halo. So the first one I see is somewhere around here. So I just take my brush and I try to make a nice circle. You can rotate your brush to do this. And don't worry about it coming out perfect at this stage. I'm taking all the water off my brush as well. So I'm dipping in and then I'm taking the water off with a paper towel. That one might be a little bit too bright, but that's okay. And then we'll make another one here. Just rotating the brush. Okay, wipe it off, clean it off, and you can push some out like that if you want to. The trick is to get your circles fairly circular. So this one's a bit, not quite a circle. And don't have too wet of a brush, because what will happen is it'll start bleeding out. I don't mind that it's on one side, it's a little darker than the other. That helps with the effect. Okay, so we have two of them. Let's do another one here. This part is probably quite wet, so maybe we'll go here. And you don't want them all the same size either. That's the other thing. So mine are pretty much all the same size, but put that in the shape. And we won't go back in, and they look really white right now, but we'll go back in and add some graduated color to them. So they look pretty. Okay. And maybe we'll have one that's kind of big right here. Let's do it right here. Doesn't look big, does it? Okay, keep going. Okay, wiping that excess off. And I'm not worried about this at all. Where it's coming in, that's just perfect. In fact, I'm encouraging it to do that. Okay, what do you think? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We need one more. Now let's make a really pale one here. Barely detectable. Yeah, you could also vary the size of your brush. So if you wanted to do smaller ones, you can take a smaller brush. want to get my hair in there. Okay. And really where you position them is entirely up to you. I'm thinking I need one here. There. That's it. Now we let that dry.